So, you think your politician is bad? You think corruption is at an all-time high? Well, buckle up, because today we're talking about a man who made your worst political nightmare look like a kindergarten teacher having a rough day. This is Idi Amin Dada. And yes, before you ask, that was his real name, not a villainous alter ego from the bad action movie. Between 1971 and 1979, this man turned Uganda into his personal horror show, killing an estimated 300,000 people. For context, that's roughly the entire population of Lamu, just gone. Lessons Kenya and even the greater East Africa can't afford to ignore. Now, here's the thing about dictators. They rarely start out looking like villains. They don't show up twirling mustaches and announcing, "Hello, I'm here to destroy your democracy." No, they're often charming. They promise stability. They position themselves as the only solution to chaos. Idi Amin was born around 1925, and I say around because even his birth year is disputed, which should have been the first red flag. The man couldn't even be honest about when he was born. He grew up in the small town of Koboko in northwestern Uganda with minimal education. In fact, he only reached 4th grade, which, look, education isn't everything, but when you're running a country, maybe a bit more schooling would actually go a long way. Amin joined the British colonial army, the King's African Rifles, in 1946. And here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean deeply troubling. The British loved Amin. Why? Because he was physically imposing, standing 6 feet 4 inches and built like a freaking brick wall. And he was brutally effective at crushing the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya during the 1950s. Let me repeat that. The British colonial forces used Amin to suppress Kenyan freedom fighters. Gosh. Kenya, this concerns you directly. The violence that Amin learned, the tactics that he perfected, he learned them putting down your independence movement. Just take a moment and think about that. That the gruesome and grotesque things that he did, he actually learned them when he was trying to beat us into submission as Kenyans. The British commanders actually had to investigate Amin several times for excessive brutality. Think about that. You know, the colonial British Empire, the same people who ran concentration camps in Kenya, the same empire that caused famines killing millions in India, thought Amin was too brutal. That's like Gordon Ramsay saying your restaurant is too hungry. Come on, man. But they kept promoting him because he was useful. Classic imperial playbook. Find a local strongman, give him weapons and authority, use him to control the population, then act shocked when he turns that violence on his own people. Think about that. Or as Swale would say, tafakari ya babu. But by 1962, Uganda gained independence and Milton Obote became prime minister, then president. Obote and Amin had a complicated relationship. You see, Amin helped Obote consolidate power, including a 1966 attack on the Buganda Kingdom's palace. Again, Amin was the muscle behind political violence. Sounds familiar? Kenya. How many times have we seen politicians use youthful and youth wingers or hired gangs or hired goonsies to do their dirty work? How many Kenyan politicians have their own Idi Amins? People willing to crack skulls for actual political points. By 1971, Obote was getting nervous. Amin was too powerful, too popular with the military, and there were whispers of corruption. Specifically, that Amin was embezzling funds meant for military supplies and selling gold and ivory smuggled from Congo. So in January 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth summit in Singapore, Amin launched a military coup. And here's the kicker. Ugandans initially celebrated. They danced in the streets. They thought, finally, we are free from Obote's corruption and authoritarianism. They had no idea they just traded a problematic leader for a genocidal maniac. Lessons for Kenya. Be careful what you wish for. Populist military figures who promise to clean up the mess often create a bigger one. Kenya's flirtation with military-backed politics should be a warning and not a template. Within months, Amin's true nature emerged. It emerged violently. First, he went after the military. Any soldiers loyal to Obote were rounded up and executed. We're talking thousands of soldiers from the Acholi and Lango ethnic groups. Obote's support base murdered in their barracks. The Jinja and Mbarara barracks became unfortunate killing fields. Then he went after the intellectuals, university professors, lawyers, doctors, journalists, anyone who might question or who questioned his authority. Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanuko was abducted and swiftly and sadly murdered. Prominent writer and playwright Byron Kawadawa murdered. Anglican Bishop Janani Lumum murdered. And this was a bishop killed. Imagine a bishop that is actually killed by the state. In comparison, Tanzania's John Magufuli's targeting of intellectuals, scientists, and statisticians should ring alarm bells everywhere. When a leader starts attacking educated people and experts, when they dismiss research and data, you are watching the Amin playbook in action. Amin created the State Research Bureau, which sounds like a boring government department, but was actually a death squad. They operated out of Nakasero in Kampala, where screams could be heard day and night. People would be taken there and never, ever seen again. The methods were horrific. I'm going to go into the graphic details, but bodies would wash up on the shores of Lake Victoria regularly. Torture was systemic and systematic. Families would receive dismembered body parts of their loved ones as an actual warning. Guys, think about that. And here's where East Africa enters the story directly. Obote fled to Tanzania after the coup, where President Julius Nyerere gave him sanctuary. Nyerere refused to recognize Amin's government, while the UK, Israel, and even United States initially maintained relations with Amin. Nyerere said no. This is illegitimate. For that moral stance, Amin declared Nyerere an enemy. He claimed Tanzanian territory. He sent troops across the border. He supported rebel groups trying to overthrow Nyerere. Nyerere's Tanzania stood on principle against Amin, even when it was costly. Today's Tanzania must ask, are we maintaining that moral clarity? Are we sliding towards Amin-style suppression of dissent? Now, let's talk about Amin's most internationally famous atrocity, the expulsion of Asians in 1972. Uganda's ancient community, mostly of Indian descent, numbered about 80,000 or 90,000. They were doctors, engineers, business owners, the economic backbone of the country. Amin gave them 90 days to leave. 90 days to abandon their homes, their businesses, everything that they had actually built and worked hard for. Why? Officially, he claimed it was economic nationalism, giving Ugandan back to Ugandans. In reality, it was theft on a massive scale. Amin and his cronies seized all Asian-owned businesses, banks, factories, farms. They distributed them to loyalists who had no idea how to actually run them. The result? Uganda's economy collapsed. GDP fell by 10% in a single year. Industries shut down. Infrastructure crumbled. The currency became worthless. Turns out, when you expel everyone who knows how to run the economy and replace them with sycophants, things actually fall apart. But who knew? Economic nationalism, that's really just an ethnic chauvinism, and theft destroys economies. Kenya's periodic flirtation with excluding certain communities from the economic life based on their ethnicity should be rejected absolutely. That whole idea that this tribe is better at this and they should be given priority because they are known to be good at building or running business should not have any place in our society. The whole idea that we back our politicians via their ethnic backgrounds or their ethnicities should be something that every Kenyan everywhere should be fighting against vehemently. Here's the truly bizarre part. While all this horror was happening, Amin cultivated this international image as a clownish buffoon. He gave himself absurd names and titles like His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DCO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa. In general, and Uganda in particular. I didn't make that up. That was his actual official title. He'd make bizarre pronouncement. He offered to be King of Scotland. He wanted to marry Princess Anne. He claimed to have prophetic dreams. He sent telegrams to Julius Nyerere addressing him as my dear brother. Imagine. Western media ate it up. Look at the funny African dictator they loved. Saturday Night Live did skits. Forrest Whitaker would eventually win an Oscar. An actual Oscar. Playing Idi Amin Dada. But this wasn't comedy to Ugandans. While the West laughed, people were being murdered. While journalists wrote amused profiles, bodies actually floated on lakes. Now, do not let the performative absurdity distract from authoritarian action. When leaders act like clowns but govern like tyrants, focus on the governance, not the performance. When leaders use the colloquial ama namna gani mai, don't look at what they say. When leaders use wordy statements, don't listen to what they say. Listen and watch what they're actually doing. By 1978, even Amin's own military was getting restless. Soldiers weren't being paid. The economy was in shambles. International isolation was nearly complete. Even the Soviet Union had abandoned him. So, Amin did what desperate dictators do. He started a war to distract from problems at home. In October 1978, Amin invaded Tanzania, occupying the Kagera region. He claimed Tanzania was harboring rebels, which was true. Obote and thousands of Ugandans had exiled back to Tanzania. But this was a flagrant invasion of a sovereign nation. Julius Nyerere had had enough. Tanzania mobilized, and here's what was remarkable. Nyerere didn't just want to push Amin back across the border. He wanted to remove him entirely. The Tanzanian People's Defense Force, joined by Ugandan rebels, launched a counter-offensive. They pushed north, taking city after city. Amin's military, despite their reputation for brutality, finally collapsed. Turns out an army based on fear and loyalty to one man isn't great at actual fighting. And by April 1979, Tanzanian forces and Ugandan rebels had entered Kampala. Amin fled first to Libya, where his buddy Gaddafi gave him refuge. Then eventually to Saudi Arabia, where he lived in a comfortable exile until his death in 2003. Let me repeat that. Idi Amin, responsible for 300,000 deaths, lived comfortably in Saudi Arabia for 24 years. He died of natural causes at age 78, never, ever actually facing justice. Think about that. He never faced trial, never saw the inside of a prison, just lived out his days in a villa in Jeddah. International justice is a myth unless nations demand it. The fact that Amin died free should enrage all of us and motivate us to build strong regional justice mechanisms. The liberation of Uganda should have been a triumph, and initially it was. People actually celebrated. Obote eventually returned to power. But here's the tragic part. Uganda's nightmare wasn't over. Obote's second government was nearly as brutal as Amin's. Then came a series of short-lived leaders. Then, in 1986, Yoweri Museveni took power. Museveni is still in power today. That's 39 years and counting. And as of his current campaign charge, he asked Ugandans to give him another bath, to allow him one more term, to try and finish what he hasn't been able to accomplish in 39 years. He's changed the constitution twice to extend his rule. He's rigged elections. He's brutalized opposition. Uganda escaped Amin only to end up with another long-term authoritarian. So, what does this mean for Kenya? Kenya, you flirted with authoritarianism. You've had one-party state under President Moi that lasted 24 years. You've had post-election violence that killed over 1,000 people in 2007, 2008. You've had extrajudicial killings by the police. You've had politicians who've mobilized ethnic militia. Every time a Kenyan politician tells you that democracy is too slow, that what Kenya needs is a strong hand, that certain communities are enemies of development, alarm bells should ring. Those are the same justifications Amin actually used. When politicians use ethnic divisions as a tool, when they demonize specific communities, when they stack security forces with their own ethnic group, gentlemen, you're watching the actual Amin playbook. When journalists disappear or are attacked, when civil society is harassed, when the courts are undermined and court orders are not obeyed, you are actually on a dangerous path. Strong institution over strong men. Every time democratic guardrails aren't obstacles to progress, they are what prevent progress from turning into actual or sad mass graves. And for our neighbors in Tanzania, who are currently going down the ringer, you are facing your own moment of reckoning. Magufuli's presidency saw sharp authoritarian turn. Opposition leaders were attacked, media outlets were shut down, and statistics officers pressured to manipulate data. Pregnant girls were actually banned from going back to school. COVID denialism that actually cost lives. His successor, Samia Suluhu Hassan, made some reforms, but the question remains, is Tanzania returning to Nyerere's principle of principled leadership, or are they consolidating a softer authoritarianism? With what has happened in the last few days since the election, President Samia Suluhu Hassan could actually prove to be a worse authoritarian than John Pombe Magufuli. Nyerere stood against Amin when it cost Tanzania economically and militarily. That moral clarity is Tanzania's greatest legacy. But Nyerere also created a one-party state. Even he made authoritarian choices. The lesson isn't to worship past leaders. It's to build systems that prevent anyone from becoming the next Idi Amin, even if they start with good and favorable intentions. Idi Amin's story isn't just history. It's a warning. It was a blueprint for how democracies actually die, how populism turns into genocide, and how strong man becomes the murderer. Kenya and Tanzania and the greater East Africa, you've both escaped versions of this nightmare. Do not walk back into it, because once you let an Amin take power, getting rid of him requires war, thousands of deaths, and decades to recover. And that's our show. Next week, we are covering Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, the man who stole an entire country's wealth and wore leopard skin while doing it. I'm your host, DY. And remember, democracy is fragile, autocracy is brutal, and 300,000 people died because people thought, how bad could he be? Join us next, and do not forget to subscribe, to like, and to share this video and comment, and let's discuss all this. Thank you again, asante sana, and have yourselves a lovely evening, or day, or morning.